From the moment Alex stepped onto his new porch, he felt it, that strange sensation of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. Someone really was observing him. Across the street, behind lace curtains, a figure stood motionless. Eyes locked on him like a security camera tracking every move. He pretended not to notice, unloading a few boxes from his car. But before he could even close the trunk, the front door across the street swung open. Out marched a woman, clipboard in hand, expression tight with disapproval. Alex didn't even get a chance to introduce himself. "You're new here." Her voice was clipped, her tone more of an interrogation than a greeting. Alex set the box down, forcing a polite smile. "Yep, just moved in." Her eyes flicked toward his freshly painted mailbox, then to his yard. She let out a sigh, shaking her head as if she had just discovered a crime scene. "That mailbox color," she said, pointing. "It's not HOA approved. And those flowers? That's excessive." Alex blinked. Excessive? Unregulated gardens like that lower property values. "We have standards in this neighborhood." He glanced at his flower bed, bright wildflowers, swaying in the breeze, attracting bees and butterflies. It was beautiful. And yet, here was this woman treating it like a pile of trash dumped on the lawn. "That's funny," he said with a smirk. "I thought I owned this property." Karen didn't smile. That was the moment Alex realized he hadn't just moved into a house. He had stepped into her domain. And whether he liked it or not, she had already decided he was the problem. Alex loved the idea of having a small backyard retreat. Nothing fancy, just a simple wooden gazebo where he could relax with a cup of coffee and enjoy the fresh air. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, and it certainly wasn't hurting anyone. He spent the weekend putting it together, carefully placing each panel and securing the posts. By Sunday evening, it was done. The next morning, just as Alex was admiring his handiwork, he heard the familiar sound of Karen's sharp voice from across the street. "I knew it," she huffed, arms crossed tightly. "That thing is a disaster waiting to happen." Alex turned, confused. "You mean my gazebo?" She scoffed. "That's not a gazebo. That's an unauthorized, hazardous structure that poses a risk to this community. I warned you about keeping things in order." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Karen, it's literally just a sitting area in my own yard." She ignored him, already storming back toward her house. "You'll see," she muttered. Alex shook his head, deciding not to waste his time arguing. He had no idea she meant it as a threat, until an hour later when a police car pulled up in front of his house. A uniformed officer stepped out, glancing at a notepad before approaching Alex. "Sir, we received a report about an unsafe structure on your property." Alex blinked. "Unsafe structure?" The officer gestured toward the backyard. "Mind if I take a look?" Still in disbelief, Alex led the officer to the gazebo. The man walked around it, checking the frame, even tapping one of the wooden posts. After a moment, he exhaled and shook his head. "This looks fine to me. Solid build, nothing dangerous." Just then, Karen appeared at the fence, hands on her hips. "Are you serious?" she snapped. "That thing is a liability. What if it collapses? What if it attracts loiterers? What if—" The officer cut her off. I don't see any violations here. It's private property, and nothing about this structure breaks any laws." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked caught off guard. But it ruins the aesthetic of the neighborhood." The officer sighed. "That's not a police matter." Alex tried to hold back his laughter. He turned to Karen and gave her a polite smile. "Looks like my hazard checks out. Heh." Karen's face turned red with frustration. Without another word, she spun around and stormed back to her house, slamming the door behind her. The officer gave Alex an apologetic nod. "Sorry about that. We get calls like this sometimes." Alex shrugged. "No worries. I have a feeling this isn't the last time." The officer chuckled. "Good luck." As the police car pulled away, Alex shook his head. Karen had lost this round, but he could already tell this was just the beginning. The next few days were anything but peaceful. Karen, humiliated by her failed attempt to get the police on her side, was determined to make Alex's life miserable in any way she could. It started small. Every morning, as Alex stepped outside, he found a neatly folded note taped to his door, each one typed in a cold, formal tone. Your yard is an eyesore. Your property is bringing down neighborhood values. Your unkempt plants could be harboring rodents. Alex chuckled as he read them, shaking his head. He tossed the first few in the trash. By the fifth note, he started pinning them to his fridge like trophies. Then, Karen escalated. One afternoon, Alex noticed her standing across the street, snapping pictures of his property. Every detail seemed to interest her. His mailbox, his grass, his wildflowers. She even crouched down to get a better angle of his fence. Need a better shot? Alex called out. She straightened up, flustered. Just documenting the decline of this neighborhood. She huffed before stomping back inside. A few days later, Alex received an official-looking letter from the HOA. Subject: Neighborhood Compliance Review. Dear homeowner, we have received multiple complaints regarding potential violations on your property. Please ensure your yard meets community standards to avoid further action. Alex laughed. He knew exactly who sent those multiple complaints. Instead of arguing, he decided to have some fun. That weekend, he placed a row of small lawn gnomes at the edge of his yard, each holding tiny signs. Welcome to Karen's kingdom. Beware of HOA surveillance. Grass violations will be punished. The neighborhood kids loved it. Even a few adults chuckled as they walked by. Karen, however, was livid. She marched straight up to his driveway, face red with fury. This is harassment, she snapped. Alex leaned against his porch railing, arms crossed. Oh? I thought it was just community decoration. Don't you care about keeping things nice? Karen clenched her fists. You're making a mockery of this neighborhood. Alex grinned. I thought I was lowering property values. Shouldn't you be thanking me? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she stormed off, but Alex could see it in her eyes. This wasn't over. By the next morning, she had found a new reason to complain. The HOA sent another letter, this time claiming his grass was uneven and potentially in violation of lawn regulations. Alex grabbed a ruler, measured the blades of grass, and sent a sarcastic email back. Dear HOA, as per my inspection, my grass averages 2.8 inches, well within the 3-inch guideline. Should I hire a lawyer to confirm? No response. Karen wasn't done. That evening, as Alex relaxed on his porch, he saw her pacing near his fence, muttering to herself, tape measure in hand. She was measuring his property. Alex exhaled. This woman wasn't going to stop. And that's when he realized it was time to fight back. Saturday afternoon was perfect for a backyard barbecue. The sun was out, the grill was hot, and the smell of sizzling burgers filled the air. Alex had invited a few friends over. Nothing wild, just some casual conversation, laughter, and soft music playing in the background. As the evening settled in, neighbors strolled by, offering friendly waves. Even the kids playing down the street seemed to be having more fun than the people in Alex's yard. But there was one person who wasn't enjoying the moment. Karen. From her porch, she stood like a statue, arms crossed, eyes locked onto Alex's gathering. Every now and then, she'd shake her head, mutter something under her breath, then march back inside. Alex noticed but didn't pay much attention. He had no reason to. Until red and blue lights flashed across his driveway. A police car pulled up, stopping just short of his mailbox. The sight alone was enough to make his guests pause mid-conversation. Alex exhaled and shook his head. He already knew who was behind this. A uniformed officer stepped out and approached with a calm but tired expression. Evening, sir, he said. We got a noise complaint from a neighbor. Alex gestured around. The backyard was peaceful. Low music, people chatting, nothing out of the ordinary. Really? Alex asked. This is the noise complaint. The officer sighed. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Before Alex could respond, Karen appeared on the sidewalk. She marched forward with her signature scowl, arms folded tightly. They've been causing a disturbance all day, she accused. Loud music, yelling, disrupting the peace. I couldn't even enjoy my own home because of this. She waved toward the group like they were a bunch of criminals. The officer glanced at Alex, then at the scene behind him. A friend stood at the grill flipping patties, another sat on the porch sipping a soda, and a couple of guests chatted near the fence. It was the most relaxed disturbance he had ever seen. The officer said, visibly annoyed. This isn't excessive noise. Karen gasped. But the music. The music is barely audible from the street, the officer interrupted. This is the third time this month you've called over a non-issue. Karen's lips pursed, her frustration boiling beneath the surface. So you're saying anyone can just do whatever they want in this neighborhood? As long as they're following the law, yes, the officer replied. Alex folded his arms and gave her a polite smile. Guess that means the barbecue's still on. Karen huffed, spun around, and stormed back to her house, slamming the door. The officer sighed, turning back to Alex. If this keeps happening, you might want to file a harassment complaint. Alex smirked. I'll keep that in mind. As the police car drove away, Alex's guests exchanged amused glances. Is this normal around here? One of them asked. Alex chuckled, shaking his head. It is now. A few days after the failed noise complaint, Alex noticed something unusual. Karen wasn't lurking around his property, wasn't standing at her window with her usual glare, and hadn't left another petty note on his door. Too quiet. Too suspicious. Then, a neighbor named Tom, an older man who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, stopped by Alex's porch with a smirk. You're famous, kid, he chuckled, handing Alex a neatly folded paper. It was a petition. We, the undersigned, demand the immediate removal of the disruptive homeowner at Alex's address for repeated violations of community standards. His property has lowered the aesthetic value of our neighborhood and negatively impacted our shared quality of life. At the bottom, there were about 5 signatures. Alex laughed. She really thinks this is going to work. Oh, she's been parading around with that thing all morning, Tom said, amused. Most people told her to shove it. Sure enough, Karen was making her rounds. Clipboard in hand, she knocked on doors, launching into her well-rehearsed speech about how Alex was ruining the neighborhood. A mother of 2, Sophia, answered her door and barely let Karen finish her sentence before shaking her head. You called the cops on a barbecue, Karen. I'm not signing anything. Karen scowled. So you're okay with this neighborhood falling apart? Sophia sighed. Karen, last year you tried to fine my kid for riding his bike on the sidewalk. I think the neighborhood's fine. You're just miserable. Karen gasped as if she had been personally attacked. She turned on her heel and stomped toward the next house. At another door, a man named Jacob listened to her rant, arms crossed. When she finished, he leaned against the doorframe and smirked. Didn't you call animal control on my dog last summer? You know, the one that was literally just sitting in my backyard. Karen shifted uncomfortably. He was barking. Jacob shook his head. I'm not signing this. In fact, I don't know anyone who will. Karen's frustration grew with every rejection. She knocked on over a dozen doors, but nearly everyone refused to sign. Some even shut their doors the moment they saw her standing there. Alex, watching all this from his porch, enjoyed every second. By late afternoon, Karen stormed back home, her so-called petition an absolute failure. The few signatures she had managed to get were from the same handful of people who always sided with her. 2 elderly women who didn't even live on Alex's street, a grumpy retired man who barely left his house, and her own husband. That evening, Tom sat with Alex on his porch, sipping a beer. She really thought people would rally behind her, he said, shaking his head. She's desperate, Alex replied. And she's not done yet. Karen may have lost this battle, but she wasn't the type to give up easily. Alex had dealt with Karen's nonsense for weeks. Petty complaints, ridiculous HOA threats, even the police being called over the smallest things. But he knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't done yet. She had failed with her false petition, failed with her noise complaint, and failed to get the HOA to take her side. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Late one evening, Alex was sitting on his porch, enjoying the quiet after a long day, when he spotted her again. Karen was standing in her front yard, arms crossed, staring at his house. He could practically see the gears turning in her head. Then, she pulled out her phone. Alex already knew what was coming. 20 minutes later, the familiar flash of red and blue filled the street. A police car slowed to a stop in front of his house. Alex sighed, setting down his drink. Here we go again. This time, 2 officers stepped out. One of them looked exhausted, while the other seemed just as annoyed. "Evening, sir," the older officer said. "We received another complaint." Alex crossed his arms. "Let me guess. My property is too loud again." The younger officer shook his head. "No. This time, your outdoor lights are apparently a public hazard and blinding the entire neighborhood." Alex almost laughed. His backyard had a few string lights hanging over the patio, not exactly a spotlight beaming into space. But before he could respond, Karen stomped across the street, ready to perform. "Officers, I told you." His completely disregarding community standards. "Those lights are dangerous." And his hosting illegal gatherings in his backyard, disturbing everyone. Alex turned to the officers, completely unfazed. "You want to see something?" The older officer rubbed his temples. "Please." Alex pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. His security cameras had been recording everything. He turned the screen toward them, playing footage from earlier in the evening. The illegal gathering. 3 neighbors sitting outside, casually talking. The blinding lights. A warm glow from a few string bulbs, not even visible beyond his yard. And the best part? Karen spying from her window, staring at his property for over an hour before making the call. The younger officer exhaled sharply and shook his head. The older officer turned to Karen. This is the 3rd time in a month that you've called over nonsense. We've had enough." Karen's face twisted in shock. You're taking his side? He's making a mockery of this neighborhood." The officer's expression darkened. "No, you're the problem here. If you make another false report, you could be facing legal consequences. Do you understand?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since this started, she had nothing to say. She glanced at Alex, who was standing there with the biggest grin. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back into her house. As soon as the door slammed shut, the younger officer let out a chuckle. "That might have been the most ridiculous call I've been on all month." Alex smirked. "I'd love to say this is the last time, but, well, you've met her." The older officer sighed. "If she pulls this again, let us know. You might have grounds for harassment." Alex nodded. "Noted." As the police drove away, Alex leaned against his porch railing, watching Karen's house. She had lost, and she knew it. But he also knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. A few days after the police left Karen with a final warning, something strange happened. She went quiet. No more complaints, no more notes, no more lurking at her window. But Alex knew better. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. Then, the real bomb dropped. A letter from the HOA arrived in every resident's mailbox. An official notice about Karen. After multiple reports and a thorough review, it has come to our attention that certain individuals have been enforcing non-existent regulations and misusing HOA authority. Effective immediately, all unofficial rules and fines issued by these individuals are null and void. Alex grinned as he read the words. They were talking about Karen. Turns out, her reign over the neighborhood wasn't as official as she made it seem. She had been issuing her own rules, fining people for violations that didn't exist, and even making unauthorized decisions about property standards. And the best part? She had broken the very rules she tried to enforce. She had built a storage shed on communal property without approval. She had altered her own mailbox design, something she had fined others for. She had tried to remove a neighbor's garden, while her own yard was technically non-compliant. The HOA had enough. They stripped her of any authority she had, making it clear she was just another homeowner, with no power over anyone else. That evening, Karen stormed into the HOA meeting, fuming. Clipboard in hand, she slammed it down on the table. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "I have spent years keeping this neighborhood in order. You can't just..." An HOA representative cut her off. "Karen, your leadership is over." She blinked. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." The room fell silent. Then, a voice from the back, Jacob, the same neighbor she had harassed over his dog. "Not anymore." A few chuckles echoed through the room. Karen glared at everyone, searching for support. But no one spoke. No one defended her. The same neighbors she had bullied for years sat quietly, watching her unravel. Red-faced and furious, she grabbed her clipboard, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out. The door slammed shut behind her. For the first time since moving in, Alex felt something different in the air: peace. A week after the HOA stripped Karen of her so-called authority, a new sign appeared on her front lawn. "For sale." Alex nearly dropped his coffee when he saw it. It was actually happening. 4 years, Karen had ruled over the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen. Now, she was leaving. Word spread fast. Neighbors whispered, exchanging knowing looks. Some even smiled a little too broadly as they passed by her house. No one said it out loud, but everyone was celebrating. Karen, however, wasn't going quietly. 4 days, she stomped around her yard, muttering under her breath, arms crossed, glaring at the traitors who had betrayed her. But it didn't matter. Her time was up. Then, the day finally came. A moving truck pulled into her driveway early one morning. Workers hauled out furniture while Karen stood off to the side, her usual scowl replaced with a defeated glare. Across the street, Alex sat on his porch, sipping his coffee, enjoying the moment. A few neighbors had gathered, casually watching the spectacle. It was better than reality TV. Just as Karen climbed into her car, Alex couldn't resist one final touch. He walked over to his yard and placed a small lawn gnome right at the edge of his property. The sign in its hands read, "By Karen, Neighborhood Liberation Day." A chuckle spread through the small crowd. Even Tom, the old-timer next door, gave a low whistle. Now that is a masterpiece. Karen's face turned red. She clenched the steering wheel, eyes darting toward the gnome, then at Alex. Alex raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. She had lost, and they both knew it. Without another word, Karen slammed her door and sped off. Just like that, she was gone. That evening, the neighborhood held an impromptu barbecue, the biggest one yet. Music played, kids ran around, and people laughed freely for the first time in years. Alex, flipping burgers at the grill, looked around and grinned. Karen was gone. And the neighborhood? It finally felt like home. The morning after Karen's departure, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, quieter, peaceful. Alex stepped onto his porch, coffee in hand, and took a deep breath. No angry notes. No complaints. No one watching his every move. Just the sound of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the faint laughter of kids playing down the street. His wildflower garden was in full bloom, the bright colors swaying gently in the breeze. It was exactly how he had imagined it when he moved in. A place to relax, to enjoy, to call home. A familiar voice broke the silence. Celebrating. Are we? Alex turned to see Tom, grinning as he walked up with his morning paper. Alex chuckled. Just taking it all in. Tom nodded, glancing at Karen's old house. Gotta say, it's been a long time since this place felt this normal. Across the street, neighbors were chatting freely, waving as they passed by. The usual tension that had lingered for years was completely gone. For the first time, The neighborhood felt like a real community. Mrs. Green, the sweet elderly lady from 2 doors down, shuffled over, holding a tin of fresh-baked cookies. "Thought I'd bring these over," she said with a wink. "A celebration gift. You did what no one else could, dear." Alex smiled, taking a cookie. Team effort. That evening, the entire neighborhood gathered for a barbecue, a tradition that started the night Karen left. Music played, conversations flowed, and laughter filled the air. As the sun set, Alex sat back in his chair, watching the warm glow of his string lights, not a single complaint in sight. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to peace, quiet, and a Karen-free life. The end.